welcome to the Pop Occulture show, where we dig into the crossroads of popular culture and the occult. And I'm here with my co-host Lilith Dorsey. I'm Jason Winslade, and we're here every couple of weeks to talk about all the fun stuff that we watch, and some of the stuff may be less fun. I don't know, but we started our season 3 off last episode with Agatha All Along, even though we only got halfway through it. We did see the finale of that, and maybe we'll talk about that on the Patreon, because that's a whole other level of things. But this episode, we are talking about a film that came out earlier this year. Tell us about it, Lilith.
We're talking about the American Society of Magical Negroes, and I know this would not have been your first choice. I just said to you before we started that I want to talk about it because I never want anyone to make a film like this again. I think that I don't know who it was made for. I don't know why it was made. I don't know what's happening. But the premise, this sort of magical Negro, I have to use the air quotes about that. This is something that Spike Lee came up with in a 2001 address that he gave to students at Yale. And, a lot of people know I went to NYU right after Spike Lee left. So there's a way in which he sort of defined blackness for people, defined Brooklyn for people. And, he's not my favorite person either. They're going to take my black card away for that. But I think there's sort of a ubiquitousness that he puts to his things. But anyway, that said, a magical Negro, according to Spike Lee, is a black supporting character who exists solely to serve white protagonist storyline. So you've got these things, and he talks about the legend of Bagger Vance. He talks about the Green Mile. You've got these things, I think we can see it in a lot of sitcoms and stuff like that. I'm thinking about Benson and whatnot. Benson was sort of this sort of retaliatory, magical Negro. He always saved the day. For those of us who grew up watching, Benson was a character played by Robert Guillaume in the, I want to say, late 70s and early 80s, but he sort of worked in this.
Soap.
Yes, a spinoff of Soap.
Right.
Yes, and he even in Soap, he was the butler for Jessica and the rest of them. So he always kind of had this kind of, yes, he was the person who was traditionally the cleaner or the butler or whatever, but he also, hated them and sort of also saved the day all the time. So it was an interesting character. And we've seen it not just in those two things, but we've seen it sort of recur over and over again.
I was thinking about examples of that. There's just so many. And this film references Bagger Vance, Green Mile, Driving Miss Daisy, but I think of some of the. For some reason, I was thinking to me the quintessential representation of the trope. To me, it was the actor Scatman Crothers. He always played these roles, and I was thinking of the Twilight Zone film where they did the adaptation of Kick the Can. And just he was just in so many things like that, where it was like that was his he embodied that trope.
He's in The Shining. He comes to save them.
Yeah, in The Shining. Yeah. And I wanted to know. Funny, I didn't know that it was that Spike Lee gave the speech at Yale, because the filmmaker of this movie, the writer and filmmaker Kobe Libby, went to Yale. So maybe he saw the speech, or just it was part of his collegial history. But yeah, that's definitely, that was part of his DNA. Just randomly, I was also thinking I went to Notre Dame, and the quintessential Notre Dame film that was filmed on campus the year after I graduated, and all of my friends who were in the production and musicians in the film too, and I missed it. But in Rudy, Charles Dutton's character is basically that. He's the coach that gets Rudy to, persevere. So yeah, it is pretty pervasive. Of course, Spike Lee didn't invent it. It existed long before that. Sidney Poitier often played these kinds of characters, and I think some research said that it goes back to late 14th or 15th century Spanish theater. So yeah, it's a whole thing.
Yeah, I think so. I'm thinking back to Graham and Quasey and things like that. For those of you who don't know, Graham and Quasey invented quinine, but he was using roots and herbs that were traditionally, African and Caribbean, and he came up with this cure that works for. Actually, they still give you quinine when you're in a malaria type country. So you've got this thing where there's African knowledge, there's African based knowledge that is somehow used to serve whiteness for whatever reason, and um, like I said, I still don't know what this movie's made for. I think that, first of all, it's a rom com. So let's start out with that. Because I think so many times we've talked about how it's, I don't necessarily know if it's better, but in some ways it's easier and it can be more poignant if we talk about difficult issues under the guise of sci-fi or fantasy. So we've got like a teeny bit of fantasy here, but this is basically a rom-com from start to finish. It's all sort of these cutesy little, whatever, what do you call them? Meet
Meet
cutes.
cute. Meet cute at meat box.
Yes, meet cutes in the meat box. Oh, if you haven't seen it, that's the name of the company, Meatbox.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah,
M
yeah,
E
yeah. So
E T box, like it's a social media thing, but also it's very clearly meant to be, you know, double
some
entendres.
sort of hookup app. Yeah, yeah. That's what I got. That it was some sort of hookup
Yeah.
app or something
So
like
yeah,
that.
definitely a meet cute, and yeah. So the movie starts out that he's the main character. Aaron is a yarn artist, a yarn sculptor, and it makes a very obvious case that he's very much somewhat shy and is very aware of how he takes up space and gets out of the way of all the white people in the gallery. It's sort of a film sequence of him avoiding everyone and saying excuse me, sorry, and all that.
Yeah, he's very apologetic. He's very non-threatening. His It's Aaron Mabondo. So I was like, "What is Mabondo really a thing?" I looked it up. Like in some Swahili dialects, Mabondo's like a poison in some way, which I think is interesting that that's the name he was given. But he's almost completely nondescript, right? Like there was a lot of criticism of the director because he's light-skinned, and they don't even really bring that up. But the director, who's also light skinned, I have my own light skin privilege, talks about how he wanted this to show that, like, even light skinned people have it hard too, which I think is an interesting point. But again, it gets lost in this. There's so much that he's trying to say. And in the process, he ends up saying nothing. We've got our protagonist being picked up, and, we're going to give you the spoilers here because we can't really explain at least the beginning of the film without it. But he gets picked up by the older black man who shows him that we have to sort of help white people. And there's this secret society of magical Negroes that have a secret white tears meter that they can read. And it's their job to sort of placate white people so we don't have more racial injustice and lynchings and killings and racial tension and everything like that. So Aaron should feel lucky to sign on with these magical Negroes because it's bringing down the numbers of racial incidents, and the most dangerous thing in the world is a disgruntled white man.
Yeah, David Allen Greer, of course, plays the mentor. The legendary comedian David Allen Greer, and in his character is probably one of the only characters that was part of the society that is given really any depth at all. And we see that he has this history where, like, he tells a story about his father being a shoe shiner and being spit on, and his response is to smile, and how that caused all this kinds of indignation uh, in Greer's character as a child. But then his grandmother tells him, "Well, your daddy came home alive, and that's better, than the alternative." And so that allows him to take on this task of being the magical Negro who is going to placate white people. Now, I wanted to ask you about this. It seems like, and maybe we're getting too far ahead, but it seems like there's a bit of a generational thing here too. That, like, the older generations are much more likely to, you know, be that trope, to be the step and fetch it stereotype. Whereas there's even though Aaron is very, you know, I hate using this word now, but demure, like he's very, uh, 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 submissive in a lot of ways, but yet it still doesn't sit right with him, and he does eventually implode. And when I was watching it, I was wondering, is like this seems like, he seems like a millennial, this character, and I'm wondering, like, is I don't it doesn't seem like Gen Z is as likely to kowtow like this. That maybe there's this, I don't know, generational evolution.
Oh no, I definitely think there is a generational evolution. You know, the David Allen Greer character talks about remembering these things, you know what I mean? Like actually having lived through it. Whereas we get the Aaron character and he starts off talking about he doesn't even realize his own internalized racism that he's carrying out and his own internalized fears. So it's somehow that through interacting with these older members that he, you know, realizes he can't be that person anymore, right? Like, so he has this awakening. And but it's so, I don't know, like it just sits wrong with me, you know, because there's a way in which he almost seems like a race traitor. Because, you know, when they are talking to the David Allen Greer and all the heads up at the Magical Negroes Society, you know, they talk about how we all have to work together, right? There's this sort of black unity thing happening.
Right.
And they tell him that, you know, the success of all of us is dependent on the proper behavior of the individual. So if we buy into that, then him, you know, not speaking up for himself and not really doing his job to placate the white person he's been assigned, he's kind of messing it up for everybody. And I don't, and then everybody starts to rebel on their own. So it's just such a bizarre narrative for me. Like, I don't even understand what they're saying, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some points in there that I think are really important to hit about what the film is actually trying to do. But before we get to that, though, I think it's important to contextualize this with, like, I was reading some reviews, and apparently in social media there was this disappointment that it wasn't more of like a Black Hogwarts or something, that it wasn't more of that kind of fantasy film. That is just an amazing concept, and that would be a great comedic film.
Well, we had that huge Twitter thing about hashtag Black Hogwarts. That was hilarious.
Yeah,
Like, there was so much of that. It was just amazing. I was in on it. I was like, this is
right.
great. You
So
know? So, yes, people were upset
introducing
about that.
this society, but like we don't really know very much. I mean, it's very much, as you said, it's very much on the sidelines, and there's not really a lot of. I didn't really understand the candle thing in the archives or whatever, like that they use they have magical powers, and there's even this point where we see a switchboard at the beginning where they're like, you can't use your magic for yourself. You have to use it for the white guy or the white person. And I was immediately thinking of like how that interacts with the black girl magic, you know, idea. And there are these rules about magic, but it's not really defined what magic is. And of course, the magical Negro trope is the characters don't necessarily have to be magical, although they often are in these films. But it's just simply like the magic of narrative. So it's clearly that's where they're getting the magic from. But then I wanted to ask, like, do you think it adds anything at all to put this in a, I don't know, magical fantasy context? Or is it, is that just the comedy?
I don't think it sits there very long. I wish it did. Like you said, there was so much criticism that it wasn't about Black Hogwarts. You know what I mean? It wasn't about, there's a way in which their power is tied to helping whiteness and is only allowed when it's helping whiteness, which I think is, it does us all a disservice, really. And I think thinking of it as a fantasy is impossible because we keep getting dragged back into this ridiculous rom-com with Legos and you know, coffee and all this other stuff.
And I have to say, it was not lost on me that the privileged white guy who has no idea how privileged he is his name Jason. So there you go.
I was going to ask you not to turn into an angry, unstable white guy on me during this
my white
filming.
tears are starting to. But
Yeah,
yeah,
your white tear meter.
I mean that character itself, like I found it somewhat. I mean, clearly it's meant to teach a lesson, and so it's very on the nose and obvious. But the scene in which they're playing the virtual reality video game, and he's like, "Well, I got it, so I earned it," and Aaron's like, "Well, don't you think that maybe there's other reasons why you might have been chosen to do this?" And he's like, "Oh no, because I've earned it," and like he has no idea. And then later on, when Aaron is trying to get him to listen to him, he's like, "Well, I'm not racist," even though he wasn't accused of being racist, which is has been noted is a very typical white response, being like the worst thing in the world for a white person is there to be an implication that they're racist, whereas obviously the worst thing for the black guy is to be killed. So it's that thing where and then when Aaron finally comes out and says, "This is what you've been doing to me. This is what I've been experiencing all my life," and at the end of it, he actually there's it seems like maybe we're supposed to think there's this moment of empathy where Jason is like, "Oh, I didn't know that," and so he actually seems to hear it, which there's a bit of a like, because you want to say, "Oh, he's just a dumbass white guy, he's racist, whatever, blah blah blah," but it's that thing of like it's this he doesn't know any better, because it is this systemic racism. It is that system that he's a part of, and he doesn't have any idea he's a part of it, that he's benefited from white supremacy. So there's a little bit of stuff in there that we're supposed
I
to.
didn't think he was getting it. I thought he was just going along with it at that point, because he starts out going, "I'm not racist, I'm not racist." And then by the end of the conversation, he's like, "Yeah, okay, I'm racist." And I thought he just said it because he was like not trying to believe it.
I don't think he gets it, but I think it was like something broke through for a second. That's what it seemed like, because he seemed kind of emotionally taken aback by it, and it seemed like it was played as genuine,
I
but yeah,
didn't read it as that because they're filming it. It's live streaming to all the employees of what is it called, meat
meat
whatever. Meat box. I was gonna be like meat house. What is
run
it?
by a very much like an Elon Musk type of
Yes, yes.
very Australian,
But they and first they try and stop the difficult conversation, and then the owner of the company ends up sitting on the stage going like, "Yeah, this is what we're about at Meatbox. We have the difficult conversations. We're
yeah,
not racist." Like, so just this
kind of
whole
game.
way of okay, maybe we can't have the black character just uplifting us and being magical and fixing everything, but then we can commodify somehow and use this as a genuine way to prove that we're not racist, because that the premise is that the company's making facial recognition software and it's not recognizing certain African countries' facial features, which if you look at it, I mean, there's a wonderful documentary about it. Like, facial recognition software is not designed to recognize African faces, and all those, like, I can't get the water thing in the bathroom or the towel thing to work. It's calibrated not to recognize dark skin. It's ridiculous, but that's just how they do these things, so it's just but again, this whole kind of spin that they put on it, and I don't know, like you said, what's the message of the film? I wish I knew. I've seen it twice now. It's so confusing to me. I mean, yes, we have this thing about, okay, this poignant story about the shoe shine thing, and then they have to access the magical Negroes through the barber shop, through the little shoe shine thing opens up, and they crawl through that, like they're going back into this history of subservience or whatnot. And I don't know what the comment they're making about that is. Like, I think that in some way they're saying, "Oh, this is better to speak up for yourself," or whatever. But Aaron himself almost gets into a serious incident, at the beginning of the film. That's how he ends up with the magical Negroes, that he's trying to help somebody, and some, whatever, poor white damsel in distress starts accusing him of stuff.
But yeah, so I had the same question that you have, because it's like, on the one hand, it is clearly satire, and it's satirizing this trope, but yet it's also kind of leaning into it too. So it doesn't quite know what it wants to be, or what message it ultimately wants to send. And there is that sort of like, I also wanted to point out the whole thing about how, so the romantic Lizzie, the romantic prospect, and I knew it was. I had this feeling it was going to be a sort of a Cyrano de Bergerac kind of thing, maybe like, oh, talk to her for me type of thing. And the way that she describes how, nobody listens to her, that she has done all this work, but she's not being recognized for it. And I was like, oh, the movie's clearly trying to make this parallel between women and black folk. But then it really hangs the lampshade at the end, because it turns out she's part of a magical society. Was it So Swag Society of Submissive Wives and Girlfriends?
Supportive. I thought it was supportive wives and girlfriends.
Supportive. Oh, so, that's where I assumed they were going
getting
with
all
it.
spanky up in here.
You're right. Supportive. But yeah, that's like the final reveal at the end of the movie, and it's like, oh, really? Like it just seemed like it's just so on the nose, and it's like, what do we do with that? Like, but and it also begs the question, who was she supporting? The wives or girlfriend thing. Like, was it Aaron or was it Jason? Like, what was her assignment? Because like his Aaron's assignment is to work on Jason and to find out what he wants and make sure he gets what he wants. And at first he's encouraged to pursue Lizzie until it comes out that Jason wants her. So it's like, oh well, now we know the white guy wants her. You have to let it go. So yeah, I mean, he obviously has to eventually stand up for himself. And my thought was, at first they were going to say, oh well, I thought they were like tricking him, that, oh, this was the test. We wanted to push you to stand up for yourself. But that's not the case.
That would have been better. That would have been much better. I would have understood that. You know what I mean? Okay, we can't have these outmoded ideas. Hopefully, finally, if we have strength in numbers, then we can band together against racism without being a, step and fetch it, sleep and eat kind of doormat person all the time. And I think that would have been a great message. But that's not the one to get in the thing.
And it's clear that David Allen Greer's character is sympathetic to him and wants him to. And, he's not mad about the fact that he can't erase his memory at the end. He's like, well, okay, well, now you know what to do. But it is funny because, like, this also reminds me of when we talked about Live and Let Die, the whole idea that there's really this secret society of black people who all know each other and are working together behind the scenes against white people. And it's like almost like the opposite of that. It's like working behind the scenes for white people, which in some ways is like worse.
Sure. Yeah. No, I have such a problem with this Aaron character. And again, it's not only because he's light skinned. I think he's trying to do so much with this character. And like I said, it's doing nothing. I love the way that he's got him for the first, 3/4, 9/10 of the film. He's in these like very muted type colors and things like that. And then there's this sort of metaphor of him knitting himself this orange sweater that he has at the end when he's finally ready to stand up for himself. So it's like he doesn't have to see everything in black and white. We've got this color change where now the whole world is open to him. And I know it's a rom-com, but it's just so painful. You're trying to talk about serious things, and then it's like, oh, it's all good. He got the girl and the orange sweater. It'll be fine. It's just like, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
It hurts.
It is an interesting choice to frame all this within a rom-com. Like, because we were talking before how you wanted to sort of contrast this with Lovecraft Country, and that the notion that I mean, if this was done in the context of a more, I don't know, I mean, it was always going to be satirical and a bit of comedy in there, but if it was done in a more maybe fantasy adventure thing, rather than a rom-com, maybe it would have been more effective. I don't know what you think about that.
I think so. I mean, obviously, there's genre blending and all of these things, but I think that he certainly could have had it a little bit more like a fantasy, witchy, black type thing, and then also included some kind of love storyline as the backstory. That would have worked. But the thing that I was saying again to you before we started, that it's interesting to me that they have Aaron being a RISD student. I spent over a decade in Rhode Island, living a couple of miles away from RISD, which is in Providence, which really is Lovecraft country. So, but it has this reputation as being, what do they call it? The Harvard of art schools. And it does, to a certain extent, have that kind of reputation in the art world. So you've got him having the light skin privilege, you've got him having the educational privilege, and yet he never acknowledges that in any way. And I think that's also a challenge. He sort of fits in this weird little like LA, IT world. And even though he's an artist and he's weird and, all of those kinds of things, that they accept him because of his education and because of his light skin privilege. And yet nobody in this damn thing ever seems to do anything except for Lizzie. Like nobody goes to work. Nobody does anything.
Yeah. Well, at one point he does say, "My mother was white, so
Yeah.
I get white people," or he knows how to navigate, right? So
But he doesn't. We see that from the very beginning. Like he's got the worst of both worlds. He's standing at the art show, can't sell anything, and his whatever, the art promoter is like, I can't believe in you if you can't believe in yourself, right? So he doesn't even have any modicum of self-worth here or self-acceptance.
And one of the art collectors thinks he's the waiter.
Sure.
That little nugget. Yeah, so I mean, I guess bringing back to the question of like, what does the magic, the occult aspect add to this? Is it just simply a plot construct? Does it add anything thematically? I don't know.
No, I don't think it does. I mean, I think there's obvious parallels. It's supposed to be satire. I think if the director went a little bit further, it would have been even better. Again, it's still trying to sit on the fence, but we've got the parallels with the leader of it sort of reminding me of the, whatever her name is in The Wiz, right? Like the bad witch in the sweatshop factory that she's, got this kind of thing where she's hovering above them and giving them orders and stuff. So we've got teeny little references to that, but I don't think it adds anything to the storyline.
That whole thing about like, oh, if one person makes because it showed earlier on that there was a woman who's a scientist who tells the guy, tells her mission, her white guy, just read the paper that you're citing, and this is enough to get her banished because she's like spoken up in even the slightest way. And I mean, of course, as audience, we're supposed to see that as stupid, but yet it's still like we're still supposed to have faith in the story that way. I don't know. Like, yeah, I mean, the idea that one person by even slightly speaking up ruins it for everybody, ruins all the black magic, the literal black magic.
Yeah, the literal black magic. Yeah.
Like, I mean, that seems like a horrible message, right? I mean, I know we're supposed to see it as bad, but that's the foundation of the film. I don't know.
Yeah, that is the foundation of the film, and it is a horrible message. It really is a horrible message, and I think that on so many different levels, right? Like, I mean, I think it's not valorizing the connections between Black people that did allow them to survive and thrive in some cases. So it's sort of, poo-pooing all of that and saying that, like, this sort of unity that maybe our great-grandparents had or something like that, that allowed them to maybe be a little less advocating for themselves, a little bit more mouthy or whatever, it kept them alive and you wouldn't be here. But it's like that just gets thrown out the window. That
Yeah.
just gets, okay, no, we don't need that anymore. I'm going to do what I want for a piece of ass. And I don't like that story.
I mean, I think this is one of those few times where I actually agree with a lot of the critics that so much of this is throwaway where it deserves a lot more uh, complex thought, and that it doesn't quite do the idea justice, and it's a great idea, but yeah, it doesn't quite execute it in a way that has any real strong takeaway.
Right. That's why I was comparing it to Lovecraft Country, because I think that in there they really do show some of those really important things about history, Emmett Till and the Green Book and all of those things. And I think that, and it shows a different kind of Black people magic, that they could transcend it in these different ways, and that to me is so much better than what this film is saying. It just, I don't even know how it got made. It's an embarrassment.
So that's
All
our
right.
episode for this week. The American Society of Magical Negroes. It's on Amazon Prime if you want to watch it and see what we're talking about if you haven't seen it. I think it's worth watching to sort of engage in these discussions and issues. Do we think it's a strong film? Not so much, but I mean, it's entertaining, but not for the purposes that we want. Anyway,
I would give it the most cringy film ever award, honestly. Like everything, I was just like,
the
you
the
know.
the golden cringe that should be
Yeah,
a
the golden cringe. Yeah, yeah.
a little award. We awarded
Zero
the golden cringe.
broomsticks, right?
So yeah, so join us in a couple of weeks for our next episode. We might be looking at some old school television properties. We'll possibly be going into the land between light and shadow, science and superstition. I'll give you a little hint there. But as always, join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/popcultureshow, where we have deleted scenes and other fun materials from our broadcasts and all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah, and don't forget to follow us on YouTube. Everything's on my Lilith Dorsey channel, but we also have a pop culture page on Facebook, Instagram. We've got the things. We even still have a formerly known as Twitter page. So please like, subscribe, comment, let us know what you think, and thanks for watching.